In this lesson, moving forward with our Guestbook project, I'm going to go ahead and run the Guestbook app on the cluster, right? So we created the cluster, we configured the time zones, and then we see that our cluster called Guestbook is running in US East time zone with default cluster size of 3 nodes. So next, after the cluster has been created, okay, and by the way, you can run the kubectl cluster-info, and this will give you the list of all the clusters running, and not all the clusters running, but will give you the actual details of this particular cluster, which is our Guestbook, right? So here's the Kubernetes dashboard, by the way, just in case if you were wondering how do I get to my Kubernetes UI. This is the URL. Okay, so you'll just use this URL, copy it, go to your Kubernetes dashboard, and notice this dashboard is for a different cluster, right? This is for the Claydesk app that we've been using. So I'm just gonna paste this, hit enter key, and click on advanced, proceed to this IP address, admin, and of course my password for the Guestbook Kubernetes UI is something like this. Just copy this here, and I also have it here as well. Okay, so after you create the cluster, you need to run 2 commands, by the way. gcloud container clusters describe Guestbook, or whichever the name of your cluster is, and what this will do is step 1, this will give you the admin and password for the Kubernetes UI, okay, user interface. And then you run the kubectl cluster-info, and this will give you the URL. In fact, let me write this. This provides the username and password, and this provides the URL to K8s, or Kubernetes, also known as K8s, by the way, dashboard. Perfect. So once I have the password copied here, click login, and this will log into the Kubernetes dashboard for this cluster called Guestbook. Okay, so make sure you don't get confused, because you may have several clusters running within the Google Cloud Platform. So you want to make sure you log into the right Kubernetes dashboard. Okay, so here we are on the Kubernetes dashboard for the Guestbook. If I can click on the all user namespaces, go to my kube system, and this is going to list the deployments, replica sets, and these are again the default deployments and replica sets when you create the cluster. Okay, so and under pods, these are again default pods. So we did not create any pods yet. Next, we are going to create a pod for our Guestbook app on our cluster. So I just wanted to quickly demonstrate how to get to the Kubernetes UI. And by the way, you can here, of course, upload the YAML files as well. Click on YAML, upload, and you can specify the details and so on. Okay, but we'll use the shell to do all of this. Okay, all right, great. So let's go back to our container engine and the shell here. Let me make this bigger. So once our cluster is created, next is to run the Guestbook app on the cluster, right? So the first thing that we're going to do here is to start up a pod for the Redis master. Okay, and we'll use a replication controller to create the pod, even though it's just a single pod, and the controller is still useful basically for monitoring the health and restarting the pod if required. So let's go ahead and we'll use the Redis master-controller YAML file, and again this is on the Kubernetes Guestbook example. Let me go here, and here's this file. Okay, so you need this file to run on your cluster, and the contents of this file are right here. So it tells you the version, the kind, the name, and here are the labels. So Redis master backend, so it's the tier is backend, because this is our master, and then of course later on we'll create the 2 slaves, right? So here are the replicas. If you want, you can always change the number here. If you want more than 1 replica, you can modify it according to your own requirements. And of course we have the metadata, labels, and then the specs. Okay, so I just wanted to show you the actual file that we'll be deploying onto our cluster. So let's go back to our container engine, go to our shell. Let me clear this so we start from the top. Alright, so at this point we need to bring in the files, right, before we actually move forward and start to create and deploy our master Redis front end. So in order to bring in the file, we can simply first navigate, and let me show you that here's the github.com, right? So these are the files that we need basically. So the front end deployment.yaml, front end service, Redis master, and then Redis slave. So all of these files are required. Okay, so in order to fork them, you can just simply click on fork here on the GitHub and clone this. Click on the drop down arrow and simply copy this URL. Okay, or you can copy this URL here as well, but make sure you have the .git next to it. So once you have this URL, let's go to our shell, and let me first do an ls just to see how many directories do I have. So there's clades-1380, which I'm in. So I'm going to go ahead and say git clone and then use this. And it says the directory already exists. Alright, perfect. So I already have this downloaded in one of the previous lessons. So let's change to this directory, Kubernetes. By the way, if you don't have this directory, you can create the directory and then use the command that I just showed you up on top, git clone, and then the URL, and it's going to clone all the files within this directory. And once you have those files, you can simply navigate to the directory just like I'm doing right now, cd kubernetes. Let's do the ls and see the contents. Perfect. So there's a folder called examples. Let's do the ls again. I'm showing you step by step, right? And notice here's the guestbook, right? So that's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to do cd guestbook, to the ls again, and in this instance you will see all these files, right? So you'll have the front end service YAML, you have the Redis master deployment, slave, both for service and deployments, right? So you'll have all these files that are required. So once you have these files, then we need to simply go ahead and create and deploy our Redis master first, right? So let's go ahead and do kubectl create. Make sure I spell the word create correctly, the flag F, and then the name of the file, right? So it's redis master deployment .yaml. Hit the enter key, and it says deployment Redis master is successfully created. Next, I can do the kubectl get pods just to verify. And what this will do is it will give me the list of pods, right? So here's my running pod, which is Redis master, and it gives the number 209, so on. It's ready and it's running. Okay, and age is about 1 minute ago I created this. Now, of course, in order to verify, I can always take a look at whether my Redis master and this number has been deployed or not. So if I go to the Kubernetes dashboard, and let me just go ahead and refresh this and see if it shows up here within the Kubernetes UI. Let's go to our names, all user namespaces. Perfect. So here it is. So here's the Redis master, right? This was one of the deployments that we did. And here's the pod called Redis master, and it shows me that it's running, and it's about 6 minutes ago. And here's the IP address and the core and the memory. And of course, if I click on the pod itself or the deployment, I can take a look at, for example, if I click on Redis master, it'll give me the details for this. Okay. Similarly, if I go back and click on the Redis master pod, it'll give me the details for the pod as well as labels as well. Okay. And again, we'll get into labels and how they're helpful a little later. I did talk about what labels are, right? Just to make sure that we know that it's a tier is backend, the role is master, and these are again coming from the YAML file that you have. So I hope this helps. Practice deploying the Redis master, first importing the files from GitHub, right? Cloning them into a directory. After you create the cluster, you bring in the files, and then you deploy your first pod. So with this, let's move to the next lesson.